Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode we added the option to hunt down animals, and in our case we hunted down these little poor rabbits, but we still cannot loot them. So in this episode we're going to add the option to loot any animal that we want. And before we start adding the looting system, we are going to open our selection manager and we will go to the update method. Now again, it has a lot of different code and we want to do some organizing over here. We want to clean the code a bit because right now it will give us different errors. I don't know if you stumble upon any, but it should not work correctly, especially with these hand icons and the different interactable text, because this is just a mess and it's something that we had going on for a long time. So we just want to make things work better. So first of all, we go to the beginning and just follow along and make sure that your code looks exactly the same way. So first of all, we have this NPC part, and all we want to do over here is simply remove this else. Okay, so you only need this part. So if you have this part, just remove it. And let's just make it a bit more organized. Next, we're going to find our choppable tree. We're going to cut this and we're going to paste it over here. There is no real difference if it's there or here, but we just want to be a bit organized. So I place the choppable tree over here and we don't do any change over here. Next, we're going to scroll down and find the interactable object. So it's a very big chunk of code. We're going to cut all of this and we're going to place it above the animal. And we're going to do a few changes over here. First of all, we're going to remove this inner if and else statements, because right now we want to disable the distinction between a pickable object and an interactable object. So basically any interactable object will be a pickable object, because we really don't have any use for this in our game. So simply take all of this and delete this. And then also delete this else. So all you have left right now is this part with this if statement. So if the item is interactable and the player is in range, then simply show the name of the item and also show the hand icon, because any interactable item will be a pickable item. Now, of course, we can also change the name of this entire class to be pickable object, and maybe I'm going to do it later. I don't want to waste time right now because maybe if we change this name, things will not work properly, so I don't want to waste time on this. Now, if we go to this animal part that we created in the previous episode, and this is just the code that helps us detect if we're actually pointing at an animal, and then we can get its name, and then we can also deal damage to this animal if we actually press on the mouse button and if we're holding a weapon. But because we're going to add the looting option, we don't want to be able to loot the animal if it's still alive. So we're going to do a few changes over here. First of all, let's get rid of this else statement, and then we're going to go over here and create an if statement and an else statement. And we're going to take this, cut it, and place it inside the else statement. Now the if will be animal is dead. So if the animal is dead, we're going to loot it. But if it's not dead, then simply show the name and also execute this code if it's relevant. But we also want to add a few more things. Now over here, we're going to add some code to start looting. So if the animal is dead, then we're simply going to display this loot title, so the player will know that he can actually loot the animal. Then we're going to display the hand icon, we're going to hide the center dot, and we're going to set this boolean to be true. So if the player is hovering over a dead animal, then he can also press on the left mouse button and it will loot the animal. So we're going to have a class that is named lootable, so it will basically go on any animal that is lootable, or maybe any object, or maybe a chest or something. And if this animal has this lootable, it will be stored inside, and then we're simply going to run a method named loot. So I did a mistake. So we're going to have a method that is named loot, and we're going to pass inside this lootable variable. Now, before we create this class and this method, we want to continue organizing this code a bit. So let's just close this gap. And over here, after this animal part, we're going to add some more code because right now these things will not work. The interaction text and the interaction info UI, all of this will not work. So we need to fix this. So I'm going to add some code over here. So this is just a general fix after we organized all the code. So we basically check if the item that we're selecting is not an NPC and it's not an interactable object and it's not an animal, then there is no need to actually show the info UI. So we can make it blank and then also disable it. So there is no need to actually see the text. And we actually also need to add the choppable tree. So if it's not a choppable tree. And over here, we simply hide the hand because only these things should show the hand. If it's an animal, because we can loot it, and if it's an interactable object, because we can actually pick it up. But if it's not one of these, then we're going to hide the hand is visible. Because before this, we did this part every time on all of these. So it would just contradict one another and then things would not work. So this is a more clean way to work. And the last thing we want to do in this organization is to delete this final else. So we're going to create the lootable class and the loot method. But before we can actually create the lootable class, it will give us an error. So let's just comment this out and also this one. Let's save and let's go out. So we're going to create a new class. We're going to name it lootable. And we're going to drag it on our rabbit. So it will go to any animal or anything that you want to be able to loot. So we're going to drop it over here. And we're going to apply it to all the other prefabs. So now it will be on all of our prefabs. Now inside this lootable class, we're going to add a few things. So inside this lootable class, we're going to have a list of possible loot and then also a list of the loot that we actually received. Because we're going to have a list of all the possible loot and then we're simply going to create some kind of method that is going to create a random loot. So when we get this random loot, it's going to be stored inside this list. And we also have a boolean that will track if this calculation has been made, because we only want to create this calculation once, the first time we loot the animal. And now we also need to create both of these classes, so we're going to do it in the same file. So this loot possibility will be an object that simply stores an item and then we can say, okay, we want this animal to drop this specific item. And we also set a minimum amount and a max amount. For example, we want every rabbit to drop 2 pieces of hide. So we're going to say it can drop 0 pieces of hide, or it can drop 1 piece of hide, or it can drop 2 pieces of hide. So we set a minimum amount and a maximum amount. If we always wanted to drop only 1 piece of hide, then we will simply make the minimum amount 1 and the maximum amount 1. Because we're going to create some kind of random value between both of these values. And of course, because we have a list of loot possibilities, it means that we can set many items. So we can set it to drop hides, and then we can also set it to drop meat, and then we can also set it to drop coins or something like that. And also we have this loot received. So this is the actual final drop that it's going to drop. So after this is calculated, it's going to create some kind of random calculation between both of these values. It's going to generate a final value and it's going to store it inside this object. But you're going to see how all of this works. Now back inside the selection manager, we can uncomment this, and we can also uncomment this, and we can create this loot method. So inside this loot method, we simply check if this loot that we passed inside was not calculated yet, right? Because we only want to calculate this once. If it was not calculated, then we're going to calculate the loot. So we create an empty received loot list, and then we loop over all the loot possibilities that are inside this lootable item, right? Because we have this list inside. Then we also create this loot amount variable, and we store inside a random number that will go between the minimum amount and the max amount. Now, if we hover over this range, we can see that the minimum value is inclusive, but the max value is exclusive. It means that if we say from 0 to 2, it will actually do 0, 1, but it will not do this 2. So the max amount is exclusive, it will not include it. And that's why we want to increase it by 1, because we do want this max amount to be inclusive. Again, if we say the minimum amount is 0 and then the maximum amount is 5, it will simply find a random number between these two numbers and then it will save it over here. So, for example, it will give us 3. It means that it will drop 3 items of this type and will store it inside this loot amount. Then we check if the loot amount is not 0. It means that if it's more than 0, then it actually supposed to drop something, right? Because if it's 0, if it gave us 0, then nothing would drop. But if it's more than 0, then something should drop. Then we create this empty loot received and we place inside the actual item and the loot amount. So it's this random number. Then we add it to this received loot list that we created over here. And then we also set this received loot list inside the final loot list that is inside this lootable, right? Because over here we have a list of final loot. And then we also said this was loot calculated to true because we finally calculated this thing. So after all of this is done, our lootable will have a final loot list, and it will also set this to be true. And then we can use this to actually drop the loot. So let's see if the code actually works. For now, we don't have a visual way to see if it works, but we can use the inspector and check if the data is changing. So in order to actually track only one of them, let's delete all the rest and just stay with this one. I also have this one. I don't know why it exists. So we only have one rabbit, and now we can track this lootable script. But before we actually run the game, we also need to set the actual loot. So we're going to create two different things. It will be a size of 2, and the first element will be a stick and the other element will be a stone, because we still don't have any other thing. So let's go to our resources and we click on the rabbit, and we're going to drag this stone over here and the stick over here. Then we're going to say that the stone should always drop one thing. So 1 and 1. But the stick can go between 0 and 2. So it may drop 0, it may drop 1, and it may drop 2. Okay, and now let's see if it actually works. So when we click on the rabbit, it should populate this list with the final drop. So now we go to the rabbit, and of course we first need to kill it. And now we can loot it. So we clicked loot, I clicked it once, and now we can see that this final loot was calculated, and it got us 1 stone because we can only get 1 stone, but we got 2 sticks because this was the calculation. Now, in order to create this actual loot that will drop, there are different ways. We can create some kind of small UI that will pop up and show us a list of items, and then we need to drag them into our inventory or maybe click on them and then they will be added into the inventory. But this is something you can do if it fits your game. In our case, I'm going to do it more natural, something more realistic. When we click on this rabbit and we loot it, the items will simply drop into the world, and it will be similar to the way we chop down the tree and then the logs simply fall into the world. I think it gives a better game feel, so this is the way we're going to do it. So inside this loot method, we are going to expand this part so it's outside of this if statement, but it's still inside the loot. Now I also want to mention that we're creating this loot method inside the selection manager, and if you want to place it in a different spot, maybe you want to create some kind of looting system singleton so everything will be organized, it's your choice. But we don't have a lot of methods that are related to this, so we're going to place them inside the selection manager. So inside this loot method, after this if statement, after we calculated the actual loot, we want to spawn these items on the ground. So we will add some code over here. So in order to spawn our loot on the ground, we're going to get the position of the actual animal or just the lootable item, right? So we get the position and we store it inside this vector tree. Then we loop over all the loot received inside the lootable. So these are all the final things that should actually drop. And for each one of them, we're going to spawn an item according to the amount of items. So if we should drop 3 rabbit hides, it will drop and instantiate 3 rabbit hides. If we should only drop 1 rabbit hide, then it will only drop 1 rabbit hide. And over here, we simply instantiate this item. We go into our resources folder, we load a game object with the name of the loot received item. So we should also add this model to the name, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Then we also set the spawning position. So this vector tree will be the loot spawn position X, loot spawn position Y, and loot spawn position Z. And we also add a small offset to the Y because we want the loot to spawn a bit above the actual rabbit, so it will fall on the floor and it will not spawn inside the ground or something like that. And we also set the quaternion because we have to, but we don't change the rotation. Now, after all of this is done and the items are spawned, we can also make the blood puddle to stay on the floor even though the actual animal will disappear. And the way we do it is by simply checking if this lootable is an animal, because as I told you, it doesn't have to be an animal. It can be a chest or something like that, or maybe even just an enemy NPC or something like that. And if it's an animal, then we're going to get this blood puddle object, and we're going to set the parent of it to be the parent of the lootable. So we basically just take it from the animal and we place it to be a child of the parent. And I'm going to show you how it looks. And we also need to make it public because this way it's not going to work. So we go inside the animal and we have this blood puddle, but it's not public, it's just a serialized field. It means that it will show inside the inspector, but we cannot access it from another script. So make it public, and now we can access this, and there will be no more error over here. Now, after we change the transform of this blood puddle, we can finally destroy this rabbit, this dead rabbit, or any animal. Now, of course, if you have some kind of chest, then you don't want to destroy the chest, right, when you loot it. So in that case, you should adjust your code. You should check if it's a chest, then don't destroy it. Maybe just don't make it lootable again or something like that, right? But this is just an option if you have a chest. And maybe I'm going to show you how to do it with a chest later on in a different episode, but for now we're only dealing with these animals. Now, in order for this to work and actually instantiate a game object inside the scene, we are going to find a game object with this name, but it also should have this model to it. So if we go into our assets and we go into the resources, I already created a rabbit hide item and a raw meat item. So there is nothing special over here. This is the same way we created all the other items. So the sticks and the stone and the planks and the logs. So for example, we have inside the prefabs, we have the stone, right? So the stone only have this interactable object script and it has a box collider. But inside the resources, we also have this stone that is the inventory item. So this is the sprite that is getting displayed inside the inventory, and it stores different information, right? We also have it the same with the stick. We also have it with the axe. But with the axe, we have it over here inside the resources because we want to instantiate it. So all these things that we want to instantiate, we keep them inside the resources folder. The stone and the stick, we never actually instantiate them. That's why we are not storing them over here. But with the raw meat and the rabbit hide, we do want to instantiate them. That's why we place them over here, because we go into the resources folder and we load them. So the rabbit hide is the same thing. It has this inventory item script. It has this drag and drop script, and it gets all of this information. So the same way we have the stick and the same way we have the stone. All of these items can be stored inside the inventory system, and they can be dragged and they can be deleted. So that's what I did. I created a rabbit hide, I created a raw meat, and then I also created models for these items. Now you don't see it because it's pretty big, but if I make it smaller, you can see that it's rabbit hide, and then we have this underscore model, raw meat underscore model. Because without adding this part, it will simply instantiate this raw meat. So we need to make a difference between both of them, between the model and the actual inventory item. That's why we added this underscore model. So all these items that you want to instantiate over here as loot, you should add this underscore model. And if you want to have these models, you can find a link in the description and you can download them and use them inside your game. But they're pretty basic, they don't look that good, so you probably don't want to use them in your final game. And these models, again, they have this interactable object script because we do want to be able to pick them up later. And they have this rigid body and this box collider, but this is nothing new. Just do it the same way you have the stones and the sticks and all these items that you always pick up. And now we can finally go to the white rabbit, and over here instead the stick and stone, we actually want to add the rabbit hide and the meat, because it makes no sense that a rabbit drops a stone and a stick. So let's just make it 0 again. And then let's make it 2. And we're going to go into our resources and we're going to drag this rabbit hide over here and the raw meat over here. And we're going to say that the rabbit hide could drop 0 or it can drop 1, right? So it will not always drop a rabbit hide. It will be a chance of 50%. Then for the raw meat, we want it to always drop 1 raw meat. So we say 1 and 1. It means that it will always drop only 1 raw meat. But this is a certain drop and this is not a certain drop. And of course, we can also update the prefab. And if we run the game, it should work. So we kill the rabbit. And now when we click and loot it, it dropped this piece of meat. The rabbit body was destroyed and we did not get any hides because it simply fell on the other 50% chance that we don't get anything. So we need to keep hunting more rabbits, so one of them will drop a hide. And if you remember, we need 7 hides for the quest, so we should probably have many more rabbits so we have a chance to get 7 hides. And then we can simply pick up this raw meat like any other thing, so we click and it's now inside our inventory. Now everything is working and that's all for the looting system. Now before we end this episode, there's a few more things that I want to improve because we do have some things that are not working correctly. And the thing that I'm talking about is if I pick up the axe and I hit the rabbit 2 times in a row very fast, then it will die before the axe actually completed 2 animations. So it's something that can annoy players and it's a small thing, but you should notice things like that. Otherwise your game will not feel very good. So you can see that if I click twice in succession, it died and the axe just swinged once, not even 2 times. So it simply happens because we're clicking and everything is working, but the axe animation did not finish. And we had this thing with the tree, right? When we clicked on the axe, it would just reduce the health before the axe animation was done. So we created a fix for that. So now it doesn't matter how many times we click on the axe, it will first finish the animation and only then it will reduce the health. So we're going to do something like that for when we're hitting an animal. So inside the selection manager, when we try to hit an animal, we're going to check if we're holding a weapon, but we also want to check if there is no swing lock. And a swing lock is just something that we are going to create to prevent from the player to click on and actually perform this code before the animation is done. And we already have this set up in our equip system when we created the tree. So we're not going to create a lot of new things. We're simply going to create a method that is going to check if the swing lock is active. So we're going to add a condition, equip system, instance, is there a swing lock, and then we simply check if it's false. So if there is no swing lock, then we can deal the damage. Otherwise, it will not deal the damage. So let's create this method, and it will automatically create this method inside the equip system. So we go over here, generate method, and then it will create it inside the equip system. So we go into the equip system and we're going to find it over here somewhere. So we can see it over here. And now we're going to add some code to it. So it's a very simple method. It will simply check if the item that is selected is not null, so we actually have something selected or something in our hand, and it's an equipable item and we need to check it because we want to access into the script, then simply return this swing weight boolean and return it out of this method. And this swing weight boolean is something we created, as I told you, when we had our tree situation. So if this will be an equipable item, it will return this swing weight. So this can be false or true. False or true. But if it's not an equipable item, it will simply return false. So we will know that there is no swing lock at all. But Anyway, it can never happen because we're still checking this only if we have an equipable item. So only this is relevant. It will return this swing weight, and this swing weight is just a boolean that we have inside our equip system. Actually, it's not inside the equip system, it's inside the equipable item script. So let's go back over here, equipable item. So inside the equipable item script, we have this swing weight that we created many episodes ago. And this is just something that we set each time we start a new swing. So we check if the swing is false, then we can start a new swing, and then we set it to true. And then when all these animations are done, we're going to set it to be false. So this way we can know that the actual axe animation is done and we can start another axe animation. So we already have all of this created in the past. We don't need to do anything over here. We're simply getting this swing weight boolean and we're returning it over here from this method. And then when it will be returned, we can actually check it over here and check if it's false. And then if it's not false, we can hit the animal. And that will prevent this weird situation that we can click multiple times before the axe animation is done. Now, another thing to mention is that inside this equip system, inside the equipable item, over here, we have this delay, and this delay is synchronized with the axe animation, but maybe in the future you're going to create a sword as well. Then you don't want to create an entire new script that will only deal with the sword. This should also work with the sword, but maybe the sword will take a bit longer to actually finish the animation. So maybe it should be 1.5 or maybe 2 seconds, right? So in that case, we will simply create some kind of switch statement that will check if it's an axe. And if it's an axe, then it's going to return 1 second. And if it's a great sword, it's going to return something longer. But for now, just know that this is hard-coded. Delay is hard-coded for the axe. Okay, so now let's see if it solved the problem. If I'm going to click and try to hit the rabbit, it will not hit it until the actual animation is done. So everything is working as it should. And now we can loot this rabbit. And this time we got 1 meat and 1 hide because it has a 50% chance to drop a hide. So everything is good. And now we have a hide and we have this raw meat. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, how do we actually control the drop rate? Because if we want to create a 50% chance of drop rate, right? Then we simply say 0 to 1, right? So this is a 50% drop rate or just 1 out of 2, right? So if we set the minimum amount to be 0 and the maximum amount to be 1, then it will get a random number and it may be 0 or it may be 1. So there is a 50% chance that it will actually drop something. And the other 50%, it will drop 0. So this is the drop rate. But what if we want to create a smaller drop rate? Because right now this is the smallest we can get. Because if we say 0 and 2, the drop rate will go higher. It will have more chance to actually drop something than to not drop something. So we can go up, but what if we want to go down? What if we want to make an item more valuable, right? More uncommon. For this, we're going to change this thing over here. So instead of checking if we have something that is not 0, we're going to check if we have something more than 0, okay? And then we're going to be able to actually add negative values into the minimum amount. So over here, when you decide the loot of the animal, you can simply say that it will be between -2 and 1. Now, you may be wondering, what is -2? Well, -2 will be nothing, and then -1 will be nothing, and then 0 will be nothing. So there will be 3 numbers inside this range that are not going to drop anything, and only one number that is going to drop something. And this way we can control the drop rate. So let me give you an example. If we set it to be -1 to 1, then we're going to get a 30% drop rate. Because right now, the chances to get 1 is 1 out of 3, right? Because over here, we could get 0 or 1, right? So there is a 50% chance it will get 1 and a 50% chance it will get 0. But over here, we have more values. Over here, we can get -1, we can get 0, and we can get 1. So 2 out of 3 values will be negative values and we will not get anything. And only 1 out of 3 values, we're actually going to drop something. So it's 1 out of 3 and you get a 30% drop rate. If you want to get lower, so you simply say -2 to 1. So this will be 25% drop rate, right? Because now it's 1 out of 4. We have a chance to get -2, -1, 0, and then 1. So it's 1 out of 4 different values. If you want to go lower, you simply increase the negative. It will be 20%. It will be 1 out of 5 values, and then you're going to have -3, -2, 1, 0, right? So you only have 1 chance out of 5 different values to get something to be dropped. Now this may seem very simple, but you don't always want to only limit yourself to 1 drop. Because sometimes you do want to have an option to drop more things, but you do want to control the drop rate. So let's say we have -3 and the maximum will be 2, right? Then in this case, it can fall on -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So we have 6 different values. But this time we can get 1 item or we can get 2 items. So the chance to get 1 item is 1 out of 6. And the chance to get 2 items, it's also 1 out of 6. But the chance to get something at all is 2 out of 6. So if we calculate this, then 1 out of 6, and then we multiply it by 100. So we have 16%, let's just round it to 17%. We have 17% chance to get 1 item, okay? Then it's the same for the 2 item. So this is 17%. This is also 17%. But if we want to get something at all, then we simply add this up. So it's 2 divided by 6. So 2 out of 6 multiplied by 100. So we have a 33% chance to get something at all. So it may be 1, it may be 2. So we have 33% chance to get something. And it may seem confusing with all the math, but math is a part of game development. You will have your XP systems and your money systems, so you will have to know how to manage everything, and you need to understand this. But if this is a bit more confusing, just stick with 1 item, and you can go very low, for example, -10 to 1. And it means that we have 12 different values, right? All the negative ones, we have 0 and we have 1. So we have 12 different values. And if we calculate this, then 1 out of 12, and multiply by 100, we have 8% chance to get something. So 8% chance is very low, but you can actually do it. For example, if you have some kind of rare item that you want to make very, very hard to get, you can make it like that. So that's all for this episode. Now we can hunt rabbits, we can hunt any animal that we want. We simply need to create this animal. We can add the lootable script on this animal, and then we're going to be able to hunt and kill and then loot these animals and the different enemies, monsters, whatever you want. So thank you for watching. In the next episode, we're going to continue with other things. Please leave a like, please subscribe if you're still not subscribed, and see you next time.